about 8:30 in the morning. I just actually put my son on the bus. It's his first day of school, so that's why I'm getting a little bit of a late start. Also, I worked 8 hours last night, some overtime at work, make a little extra money. So yeah, we're heading to the mountains right now. We're heading to an area. It's probably about 3 hours from my house, and what we're hoping to do today is check a couple cameras I have out up there. The cameras have been out since July. I think around the 4th of July I put the cameras out. So they've been in there soaking for almost 2 months now. All right, next time you see me, we'll hopefully be in the woods. All right, I'm almost to my destination here in the mountains, and just along the road here, I noticed there's some milkweed growing, and this is some pretty useful stuff. Anybody that kind of follows the hunting beast or hunting public knows about this stuff. These are milkweed pods. And you often find milkweed growing along the sides of roads or in fields. There's some more of it. What you do is you pick the pods off, and that's why it's called milkweed right there. See that coming out? This stuff's really sticky. It's almost like Elmer's glue. But you collect a few of these pods, and then you can take a knife and you basically just score the outer pod, and then you can let that dry for about 2 weeks, maybe 20 days or so. And what will happen is inside the fluff that's attached to the seed, you can use that to check wind direction. It works really well, and it kind of carries in the wind. You can watch thermal rise, and it's a good tool for hunting. And you can get these pods pretty much, like I said, anywhere along the sides of roads and that kind of thing. You can see there's each of these plants got several pods on them. So I probably go through maybe about 10 or so, maybe 15 a season. So I'm gonna grab a few of these, and I like to leave some. I take a few, I leave a few, because there's seeds that keep the process going for the future. Alright, so here we are in the big woods of Pennsylvania. Like I said, we're about 3 hours from my house, and I'm on an access road here. You see this in quite a few spots in Pennsylvania and other areas in the Northeast. These roads provide access to parts of the woods, I guess if there's a forest fire or emergency type purposes. They're often gated, just as the one here is. And I mean, there's quite a bit of land back there that isn't accessible except by foot or by bike. They don't use motor vehicles in a lot of places, like dirt bikes or four-wheelers or quads or anything like that. Some of the electric bikes they have out now still in certain places aren't allowed because they're still considered motorized vehicles. So I utilize a mountain bike. A trail like this, you can cover a lot of ground. It's pretty well established. It has stone on it. Some of the other places I access are more like logging roads, and they're a little more rough, often kind of like higher grasses and stuff. I'm going to ride back in here. I'm going to try to locate some good sign. Alright, this is mountain laurel. And mountain laurel is pretty common in these areas. A lot of times you find it in big patches, kind of like this. This is a few acres, maybe 5-6 acres, and I've seen it a heck of a lot bigger than this too. Mountain laurel, it's not like anything you've ever probably dealt with, especially if you're from the Midwest. The tree or bush itself is it doesn't break very easy. It bends, and you can see it has a lot of limbs. They kind of go all directions, and they kind of have little like shoots in different directions, kind of like this guy here. We got one here, here, here. What happens is these all kind of twist and tangle together, and what it forms is basically like a fence or almost a wall of just almost impenetrable stuff. And what happens is these deer, they'll use this as security cover. They'll get in here, they'll hide out, they'll bed, but just like anything else, they like to find a path of least resistance. So what you're looking for a lot of times is not necessarily the big clusters of laurel. What you're looking for, just like in the marsh we were Sika scouting, You're looking for these clusters of laurel kind of transition into open hardwoods like this. And actually you can see right here's a trail on this transition line. Come this way a little further, there's even a better trail right here. Coming right through this gap here. So the deer, they stay close to the laurel, they use it, you know, they'll tuck in there to bed, to, you know, elude predators. If hunting pressure is really high, they'll even go deeper into it. And sometimes I don't think they come out till after the season's over, because what you have is, like in this patch right here's an oak tree. Back in there's another oak tree. So there's acorns in this laurel, and those deer can get inside there, and they don't have to leave for any reason at all. In fact, if you look right here, some of these trees are starting to drop. If you look right here, so there's acorns within these laurel patches. So the deer have no reason to leave them if there's a lot of pressure and that kind of thing. But as far as when they go to travel, they don't like cutting straight through these patches. So they'll do is they'll walk the edges, and just like in the frag grass or the Sika deer. And I'm walking this deer trail right now. It goes right through here. This is fairly flat in this area, but there's a hill that breaks off over here, and we'll be able to see how this laurel ties in to the topography. An old rub right here, and yeah, this laurel drops down in this valley here a little bit. What you have down there is actually a swampy area. It's probably about 30-40 yards wide, and you can see some undergrowth ties in this laurel. There's this big laurel patch right here. Now as far as bedding goes, like I said, if there's a lot of pressure, they'll go deep into that laurel. But a lot of times what I find is that the deer prefer to bed just in the little points or little patches of the laurel where it kind of comes out more into the open hardwoods. So you can see we're going to go forward here. We have this big patch of laurel right here, and it transitions out. Here's the transition line, and the laurel patch kind of tapers out, and you can see right here there's like this peninsula of laurel. Let me kind of go above, a little higher here. We got open hardwoods out there, all through there. Pretty open hardwoods out through there. And even down this direction, it's pretty open hardwoods. So what you have happening here then in this little peninsula, or this little point of laurel that overlooks all this open hardwoods, is you have bedding. And here's a bed right here. Right here. And here's a bed. It's kind of hard to tell because there's little undergrowth here, but there's a bed right here. You can see some hair in it right there, some hair. Again, here's the open hardwoods that's overlooked by this. The topography here, this hill drops this way to the north, and this whole kind of ridge kind of wraps around like this, kind of coming from maybe the northeast, kind of wrapping this way. And this laurel patch is pretty much all on this hillside, this north-facing slope here, which is pretty common. Laurel and rhododendron in this area, you'll find big patches of that usually, a lot of times on north-facing slopes. So you can see here pretty well the open hardwoods, the terrain coming up, but at the same time the softer transition of this laurel edge kind of coming along the edge of the hill here. And there's a bed right there into that tree. So what this buck will do, or deer. I mean, it looks like a pretty good sized bed, so I think it might be a buck. There's some old rubs I passed coming into here. Is with a south wind blowing this direction from the Laurel out over the open hardwoods here. This deer can smell anything coming from Laurel behind him and hear it, because you cannot get through that very quietly. And he can see all this open area below. I mean, I can see 120 yards out through there. So just like you see in like farm country or some more hill country, this big woods area, you still have your hard and soft transition lines, you know, where you get open hardwoods to laurel or pine, that kind of thing. And you also have terrain playing into the picture here with this hillside. From the bottom of that hill to the top of this hill, it's probably only about 40 feet difference in elevation. But that little bit of elevation allows that deer to see down over the hill well, have a really good wind advantage from that coming out of the laurel. Here's one of the rubs coming out of that bedding area we looked at. Over there's another old rub. Pretty good sized rubs, actually. All the rubs are pointing back to the laurel patch back here, which would indicate that that buck's probably coming out of this bedding area, this small bedding area right here. Like I said, this laurel patch here is probably about, I don't know, it might be like 10 acres of laurel. I'm not exactly sure. But it's a giant patch of laurel, 10 acres or whatever. But in the middle of it, you find a little bit of deer sign, but you find most of your sign right on the edges. And these little points and fingers where it kind of juts out, like right here. There's a bed right there. The bed that tree is right up there. Here's a little point of laurel coming out. You can actually see, it's kind of hard to pick up in this woods, but there's a trail that runs right here and goes up into that laurel. And there's a secondary trail that kind of comes across, kind of parallel on the transition line of this laurel. And they all converge kind of right in this section here. It's a pretty good spot for that buck to hang out. Here's this trail right here going up through the laurel patch. I was walking the open hardwoods here, and I came to this this cluster of laurel. It's only about 40-50 yards diameter, but it kind of again, those deer don't like to go through the laurel. So this big open woods, the deer that are kind of milling through there are kind of pinched down and using this trail right here that goes around this laurel patch, right over this blow down here, right through here. They're going right through there. Kind of in the same way that people that fish, you know, you got a lake or the ocean or wherever, you got a big body of water where fish could be anywhere. But what fishermen, the better fishermen do is they target the structure and the different things that cause those fish to congregate or cause those fish to kind of just group up. So in the same way, this big woods is like that lake or ocean, and the deer could be really anywhere. But what you need to do is you need to really focus on the areas that kind of cause those deer to group up or congregate, be it a bedding area, food source, topography that funnels deer. All these things you can identify on maps in advance in a lot of cases, and it can really save you time in the woods. Just walking around open hardwoods, it's fun, but it's not very productive. You spend a lot of time doing that, and you see a lot of ground that isn't even worth hunting. Areas like this, there's some topography here. There's also areas that are fairly flat. I'm not far from the top of the mountain here, and it's a pretty big mountaintop, so it's fairly flat up here. But it does break off pretty hard down into some of the valleys below. So topo maps could be very advantageous, looking at that terrain, identifying funnels, benches, drainage systems, different points the deer could hang out on or bed on. On these more flat areas, what's really good to get a hold of is aerial photos, especially aerial photos that were taken in the winter time or fall. The reason being, as the foliage drops, you can really start to identify some of those transition lines that aren't obvious when an aerial is taken in the summertime. These laurel patches, for instance, laurel keeps its leaves all year. Same with rhododendron, pines, those kinds of things. So as these leaves drop, an aerial photo will reveal these laurel edges and these laurel patches, and you can start to identify where they would pinch deer down. Something I've come to find too in these mountain areas and just bigger woods in general is that a lot of times the bigger buck, they don't like to get too deep into this thick stuff because it kind of nulls some of their senses, I believe. So what they like to do is find areas that maybe there's a little bit of cover, like a blowdown, or a little bit of elevation, and they'll just bed in that area so they can get maximum visibility and still smell what's behind them. I found a good example of that right here. I found a deer bed on this little hump overlooking this valley, and there is no cover. There's a small blowdown, that's it. Let's check it out. So here's this busted off birch tree, some crap there, you know, some limbs and a limb there, but look right here. This is a really good sized bed right here, and it's kind of hard to tell on the camera. I'm sorry, but there's a hump right here. It's maybe sitting about, and you kind of see it on the back side of that log there, but this hump sets up about maybe 2 feet above the surrounding hillside here, and it overlooks the same bowl or same valley here we were looking at for some of that other bedding. But let's just get a close look at this bed here. I mean, it's again, it's hard to see because it's basically just on dry leaves, but there's my hand, and you can see the outline of the bed kind of goes like this, and it's big. It goes the whole way over there. Based on the shape of it, I would say his head's on this side, his butt's on that side, and he's probably looking down over the hill that way. You can see we got deer hair in it right here. We have some deer hair. There's actually a fresh track right here, and you can see how the leaves are kicked up. We probably bumped this deer today, and in fact, touching this bed and then the surrounding ground, it's definitely warmer. This deer was here just today, and obviously there's some more of his hair right here. Obviously he saw me or heard me coming. I'm trying to take a shortcut, so to speak, back to my bike, so I kind of cut the corner here, and I encountered what you often encounter here in PA in the big woods is a big patch of laurel. That laurel is probably about 8 feet high. And unlike the fraggrass eastern shore where you can just kind of push it to the side and go through it, this stuff just knots around your legs and grabs at you. That's why the deer try to avoid going through it a lot, like deep into it, and why I'm going to go around it. When I first started hunting in these big woods, I would find some signs, some trails and stuff inside the laurel, or I'd find an opening inside the laurel, like an open patch, and I'd find deer sign, and I'd kind of congregate to it, I'd flock to it because it looked good. What I did find though is that it's pretty much impossible to go really deep into laurel without making noise, without alerting a bunch of things. I guess the only exception maybe would be like on a windy day, possibly a rainy day. Some snow would probably help, hide some of the noise. It also help you see what's in front of you better, because those deer will lay in these patches of laurel, and they may only be 5 feet, 10 feet into that laurel looking out, and you won't even see them half the time. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that I think it's actually better to use the edges, hunt the edges of this stuff. You may be off some of the movement, you may be off some of the biggest buck sign if you're in that area, but there's no point in hunting buck sign if you're blowing the whole woods out getting to it. It's better to sit the edges and hope to intercept that buck cruising that downwind edge, or coming out of that bedding area, moving off to a food source in the evening, or coming back to that bedding area in the morning after a night of chasing doe or whatever. So if I was going to give some advice about mountain laurel, it's definitely scout it, hunt around it, along it, but don't try to go too deep into it. Now if you're bear hunting, it's different. Bear will blast right through that. Especially the rhododendron, it's almost like a cave. They'll get up underneath that stuff, but as far as whitetail here in Pennsylvania, other parts of the Northeast, I find it's better to find the edges of the laurel, especially where it starts to kind of there's like little patches of laurel kind of tapering off into the open hardwoods. Those little patches are really where those buck like to kind of tuck up against so they can maximize their senses and you know, stay safe. All right, we're going to move on here. We're going to go to a different area. It's about a mile right out of here. We're going to go check out another spot. I have a camera in this spot, so we'll see if we get some good pictures.